The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Speaker.
I call the honourable member Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise on behalf of the Labour Party and give what I think has been a very considered response from our party to this piece of legislation and to the government's welfare reforms generally. And I've said it before in this House, Labour's approach to reform around welfare has always been to look through the perception that's often perpetuated by politicians in this space, dangerously so sometimes I would say, and to look to the reality, because we ignore the reality at our peril, and the more that perception is perpetuated, the more we risk our own ability to fulfil the fundamental principle of doing what's right and what works. And that is something that I will defend staunchly in this area. So if we were to come back to the evidence when it comes to welfare reform, what is the context in which these reforms are being introduced? Well, in 2009, when the government came in, if you look at the unemployment benefit numbers, we were sitting at roughly 18,000 people on an unemployment benefit. We're now looking at almost 50,000 people sitting on an unemployment benefit. And I know on this matter, the Minister and I will agree. That hasn't happened because New Zealanders have a sudden change in attitude to work. There has been a change in the economic environment in New Zealand, laying aside all of Labour's views on whether or not the government could and should have done more on that. Laying that aside, there has been economic circumstances which have led to more Kiwis joining the dole queue. And reluctantly so, I must emphasise that. Unemployment is currently at 6.7%. We only need to look in our local areas where a job is advertised and the enormous queues that extend outside of, for instance, supermarkets advertising a handful of jobs to know Kiwis want to work. Now, the Minister claims that she believes that too. Why then, during this debate and in the outside world, have we heard statements like, "The dream's over"? And members in this House, in this debate, talk about the lifestyle of living on welfare. That kind of language makes it much more difficult for us to get to the core of the issue and address the real barriers that exist for people moving from welfare into work, because there is no denying Labour is a believer in work, the value of work, the dignity that work provides, and we will do everything we can to assist Kiwis into work. So what is the barriers to that? Well, at the moment, you cannot deny it's the availability of work. We've touched on that. But also there was a survey conducted by IRD, which we've referred to consistently, which demonstrated that the other barriers for people entering to work were the cost of childcare, and for 64% of people, whether or not they had the right training and education to move into the jobs that were available. So on those measures, what does this bill do? Well, on work and on job creation, obviously very little. It's a social development bill. But what has the government done on it? Again, very little. They haven't met their own projections even on job creation that was set out in the Treasury. So on that count, we consider the government has not done enough. If you want to fix welfare, fix the economy. And on that count, we believe the government has failed. Second measure, training and education. If you're under 19 and on a benefit, you're a sole parent, for instance, then there are some measures in this bill which are training and education focused, and also if you're on an independent youth benefit. But let's put it into context, that actually equates to roughly 2,500 to 3,000 young people on welfare who will be affected by that. For the vast majority, for instance, domestic purposes benefit recipients who used to be eligible for a training incentive allowance, that's still gone. All other incentives and support around training and education, they do not exist in this bill. So let's be under no illusions there. And on childcare, well, to an extent, the Ministry of Social Development and the Minister has acknowledged that this is a barrier, because she's extended the childcare subsidy for 1,500 people. 1,500 people. And the big question we've asked is, what about the 112,000 who continue to struggle with that cost? So on those measures, this bill will not substantively assist those who need it the most. So what if you're not 18 or 19? Well, it's very easy, I think, to be misled by the minister's statement. In their last speech alone, she says, the welfare system has failed too many people, we will not let it continue. Show me how you're changing that with this bill. If you are not 18 or 19 years old and you are on welfare, all you get from this bill, Mr. Speaker, if you're on welfare, this bill provides more work testing. We are asking, what about the rest, Minister? What about the rest? Now, I understand that she is targeting 16 and 17-year-olds, but there are hundreds of thousands on the benefit now who aren't 16 and 17 who need that assistance. We will not let it continue, she says. We are modernising the welfare system. I'd like to see the evidence of that for those who are on an unemployment benefit, on the DPB or on the sickness benefit. So, if we're looking at those who are on the domestic purposes, for instance, we've already had a set of reforms brought in by the minister. We had Future Focus, so that brought in extra part-time work testing, and now we have this set of reforms. But even on the Ministry of Social Development's own projections, even after these $287 million reforms are brought in, the number on the DPB is still projected to be 10,000 higher than when the minister started. Surely that raises some flags over whether or not work testing alone is going to provide what's needed to make a real difference for those women in particular, because they do represent the most significant number of people on that form of support. So, Mr. Speaker, we highlight again, if you want to fix welfare, fix the economy, but addressed the other barriers at the same time. But in the meantime, we do agree to the extent that the government is targeting young people. The question becomes how you do it. And again, we want to come back to the evidence and the reality on the ground for those who are already working in the space of youth transition services. Now, this bill will assist 14,000 young people. This is what the ministry and the minister has projected. There are over 80,000 young people not in employment, education or training, and they're not just 16 and 17, Mr. Speaker. We heard from Youth Transition Services operating on the ground, 60% of the young people they help actually fall off the track after they're 17 and need some kind of service that is targeted to their needs and will assist them to get back into work, training, education, whatever fits their individual circumstances. We instead then have contended that the government needed to work with more, not less. And I will highlight, we're spending more and working with less via this piece of legislation. We needed to give the existing providers who are out there doing a great job the flexibility they needed to take into account the circumstances of the young person. Some are exiting from school because school was a rough place for them. They weren't on track educationally. The last thing they want to do is be shoved back into school. We've got to try and fit their aspirations with a program that keeps them on track. So we wanted to give providers that flexibility. We didn't want to skew incentives, and we feel that that's what this bill does. And again, always of the best interest and the sustainability of a young person in training in mind, not just short-term gains is our approach when it comes to young people. I want to flag, though, Mr. Speaker, in the concluding remarks of my speech, a fundamental part of these reforms that haven't been canvassed broadly. And that is that this legislation means that providers in the community, some private providers, will now be administering part of the Social Security Act to a degree that we have not seen in New Zealand. If a young person has previously a need dealt with by work and income, emergency hardship grants, any kind of grant that work and income previously would have dealt with, that is now being contracted out to the community. Now, Mr. Speaker, our concern as Labor members is what is next. This may only be 2,500 or 3,000 young people, but we believe any partitioning off of the welfare state to community organisations to a large degree via perhaps the sickness benefit might be next, the invalids benefit, we have real concerns over that kind of track. And I ask the Minister, if that is not part of her agenda, then to stand up and give this House those assurances. But, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, Labor is the party of work. We are the party of opportunity. We understand the dignity that comes with work, and families will always be better off in work. For us, the question is, how do we get there? We do not focus on rhetoric and perception in this party. We focus on evidence and the reality of what is happening on the ground. And in that sense, it is time, Mr. Speaker, we went back to true social security, a dignified system that transitioned people into the work they deserve.
I call the